Squinted in the air.
What else you from beautiful BC and Cali, Alberta? This is Nothing Really 2.0. My name is Kevin. If I tell you to have a good day, everybody's happy with that. But if I tell you to enjoy the next 24 hours while you can, people feel threatened. Joining me as usual is Christine. Hi, Christine. How you doing?
I'm doing good, and you?
Good, good.
Good.
You know, I wanted to talk about this kind of important show here because it seems that we live in a world now that we don't really know what happens with politics and what happens with laughter. So I thought to bring in an expert on the subject. So we got Eli Bosnick with us. He's one of the guys I was talking to a Thunderstorm, and he's still something Italian's best friend. he's the snappy dresser, the snappy dancer. Eli, how you doing, buddy?
I am fantastic. Terrified that I am an expert in anything. Anything like unless your podcast is like a eating 2 Subway sandwiches in a sitting podcast, no one should ever be calling me an expert on anything. But here we are.
Sounds good to me, man. Sounds good to me. We could do the Subway thing afterwards.
Yeah.
Eli, it's always a pleasure to see you, my friend. It's good to see you again. And maybe you'd be so kind to give us, because we always have new listeners, maybe you'd be so kind to give us a brief bio as to who Eli Bosnick is.
Yeah, so I'm a comedian based in New Jersey. I lived and worked in New York City for years and years, and now I'm a full-time podcaster over on the Puzzle in a Thunderstorm shows, as you mentioned, God Awful Movies, Scathing Atheist, The Skeptocrats, Citation Needed, and a brand new show now, Dear Old Dads, where I talk about parenting with 2 hosts from our sort of podcast universe with folks you probably know as well. And yeah, I'm a full-time atheist, activist, and comedian. Hopefully more of the latter than the first.
And,
What I'm saying is there are better atheist activists out there than me.
well, I don't know, man. You're probably one of the funniest guys I ever met in my life, and I absolutely enjoy your shows. And, despite the nasty rumor that somehow you're the less better looking than the other guys, I don't agree with that.
Yeah, thank you.
What do you think, Christine? Do you think he's a good looking guy?
I do. Yes, I do.
There we go.
Nice beard.
Christine, if you were to rank the attractiveness of the hosts of our Citation Needed, just tell me I wouldn't be in 5th place. I don't want to put you in the spot, but just tell me I wouldn't be in 5th. That's all I need to hear.
No.
Thank you.
So today we are going to be talking about comedy, the use of comedy in politics. And despite what people might, because people know Eli from his shows, and he is a very, very funny guy. But you're also actually very deep in your thoughts, and I totally appreciate that about you. And so maybe the first question I should ask is, where do you think we are? I mean, where do you think? How do I word this? Where do you think? I mean, comedy today has a prominent role when it comes to discussion of political moves and what's happening within within the country. Where do you think this really kind of started?
Yeah, I mean, comedy has always been a way to speak truth to power. I mean, even when you go back as far as Lenny Bruce and the pre-Lenny Bruce comedians, especially when you look at non-white areas of the world, there's been a tradition that idea of the court jester, right? Is that there is comedy is always a place to speak to power. In the American landscape, because of the nature of comedy, because comedy is surprise plus recognition, if you're going to talk about the world as you know it, you kind of got to be in touch with society and what's going on with everybody. And so that need for recognition often means that comedians, at least good comedians, are at the very edge of sort of what is going on, of the sort of general sentiment, because in a room of 100 people, if I'm going to make a joke about what's going on today, I need to hit hopefully 100 of those people, but at the very least I need to hit most of those people to make my living as a comedian. So that's the first thing that I think leads to it. The second is, and we talk about this all the time, is like comedians are the only job that is both popular entertainment and an evening of someone's opinions. Right? Like, you might go see a play, you might go see a singer, like Dolly, who puts on an incredible show, right? And this has actually changed in the last couple of years, but Dolly used to just be like, here's one for a boy named Blue, and then blam, right? She starts a new number. Comedy was really the only place for a very, very long time that someone could start by saying, this is my viewpoint on the world, and they would lead you in and out of that, everything from their family to dogs and cats are different to who the president was. But yeah, as comedy has gotten more relevant and as content has had a higher and higher turnover, comedy has had to be on sort of the very edge of where our culture is, right? Because we're no longer in a time where you're a comedian, you come up with an act, you tour with your act for 1, 2, maybe 3 years, do your spot on Carson, then everybody knows it, so you got to get your new act ready, you tour with it again. I mean, at this point, if you work out a joke at a club and it makes it to YouTube, you better have a better version of that joke or a brand new joke the next night, because big fans, especially like hardcore fans, they are aware of that. So I think that's where comedy and politics matter. And then, of course, and this is its own phenomenon, but the Jon Stewart effect, right? The Daily Show, and its progeny sort of the news show over on SNL that was sort of the start of the Daily Show, all of a sudden went from being like after Crank Yankers or before Crank Yankers, and everyone, but it was like the show after South Park, to the way a tremendous amount of sorry, I lost my train of thought. The way a tremendous amount of young people, Generation X and Millennials, got their news. And that carries on today, right? A lot of young people today get their news either from the scroll, but we also get it from content creators who are putting a funny spin on it.
Yeah. I mean, there's something very unusual about Jon Stewart coming on the scene and essentially starting a trend, a revolution in itself altogether. And of course, I just saw that he won the Mark Twain Award. So that was kind of cool. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, very, very cool.
Congratulations.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The late great Christopher Hitchens used to say that laughter was the beginning of emancipation. Do you feel that it's still the case today?
Yeah, I think it's still very much the case today. Obviously, there's good and bad sides to every profession, right? There are good movie makers, there are bad movie makers, there are good visual artists, there are bad visual artists, and there are comedians who use laughter to help people, and there are comedians who use laughter to hurt people. One of the things that I see, because people talk a lot about sort of anti-social justice comedians or older comedians who they were fans of, suddenly taking on these, transphobic in a lot of cases positions, and they're horrified by that. But you got to remember that, like, that's a hack bit as old as time. I think we were talking, I don't know if we were talking about this live or if we were talking about it in the show, but our generation, that was Andrew Dice Clay. And the young people who are watching this have no idea who the fuck that guy is. But Andrew Dice Clay was this comedian, and he was like a character, right? He was a character bit, kind of like Bobcat Goldthwait back in the day. And his character was like this sleazy Jersey guy. And what happened is, he had a joke that was like a pretty lazy gay joke, which was like, how do you look at a man's ass and want to fuck that? Right? That was the joke. Right? And it was an okay delivery, but what he realized is that a segment of his audience loved his homophobic material. Right? Loved it. And he was really popular in like early to mid 80s. And what he did is he found people who were offended by his material, and all of a sudden, his act went from, in small part, being about, that homophobic part of the character, to, one, he never dropped the character, right? He just started acting like Andrew Dice Clay all the time, and then the entire act became homophobia and people's reaction to his homophobia, and homophobia on top of that. You can also see a really good example of this in Eddie Murphy, Raw. Which, again, is an incredible special, right? You watch Eddie Murphy Raw, and that's incredible stand-up that begins with some of the most vitriolic hate you could ask to hear, right? There's something that would get you banned from Twitter, right? It is basically about how the gay community deserves AIDS and that they purposefully give it to women to kill men. I mean, it's horrifying, right? And he saw pushback against that, and again, was a very public figure at the time. And I don't say this, obviously, I'm not defending either of these people, and I'm not defending the people who are making the transphobic jokes today, but I say it to point out that sometimes when people talk about this kind of stuff, they'll be like, comedy is going over to the alt-right, or all the legends are turning into assholes. And they have to remember that this is just a different kind of hack, right? Just like, going and doing all animated films is one choice that comedians make, right? Where they just all of a sudden they become Disney voices, which is fine, right? Or some comedians, they get a spot at a casino in Las Vegas or out on one of the lakes, and they just do their act, the exact same act, forever and ever and ever. I have a buddy who is like a pretty well-known comedian. Like you'd recognize his name. And the way he makes his living is he is at a not so nice casino in New Jersey, but he does the same act he's been doing for 20 years, night after night after night. He gets paid more money than he ever made on the road, and that's the career he wants. And it's not to excuse the people for their, the hateful material that they're doing on stage, but I think it's important that young people understand that this is not a way the tide is shifting. You're just looking at one or two comedians who have taken the easy dollar.
That's interesting. Because most people have it's the tide is shifting, or the canary in the coal mine as to where society is.
Right.
But you think it as a comedian yourself, where you essentially say, no, this is just a gimmick to essentially sell more seats.
Exactly. Yeah, the way that Fox News is playing to a very specific dying market of old people who want to live in, at this point, a truly alternate reality, right? I mean, history and culture has moved forward so quickly that one of the things, I know y'all are Canadian. Christine, are you Canadian or are you?
I am. I'm
Yeah.
in the U.S. and I'm wearing this shirt because tomorrow's July 4th. And
Yeah.
yeah.
But in the U.S. at least, it is hard to express to a young person, and for good reasons, how much further culture has moved forward in the last 60 years.
Yes.
But if you're 70 years old, which is a lot of people with money who are a buying market and want to watch the news and want to watch TV, culture has moved into unknown places, right? 70-year-olds are barely familiar with the idea of civil rights, right? They're barely familiar with the idea of the disbandment of Jim Crow laws, right? So when you move them forward into things like trans rights, there is a big, wide market for people who want to be told, you're not crazy, you don't have anything to learn, the world has gone crazy, buy a MyPillow. And so I think what the young people are seeing these days is the death rattle of a generation that benefited from an economic system built to benefit the wealthy and make the wealthy wealthier and the poor poorer. But the internet is the ultimate egalitarian tool, and the truth is the kids are just smarter. I teach a college course over at New York University a couple of times a year. Haven't gotten to teach the last couple of years, obviously, because of COVID. And I think about how smart I was. I mean, I don't want to talk about anyone else, but think about how smart I was in college versus how smart and aware and politically relevant my students are. It's night and day, man. My students are like, well, I've been reading this work and I really think it's a good hegemonic idea. I mean, they are so aware of what's going on in the news. And I was like, Obama, I voted for him, right? Like that was the closest to political knowledge I had at that age. And I don't want to sound like a Pollyanna. I'm aware that we're in an incredibly dark time in American politics, but times are a-changing. Kids are more liberal than they've ever been, and we are 20 years away from those kids making up the vast majority of the electorate, right? What we're looking at now is not what will the future of the United States be. No, we're looking at the next 5-6 years. What we're looking at now is how will the young people who come and fix all this look back at this time? How will they look at us? How did we react when we didn't have the power yet?
Yeah. Going a little bit back on what you're saying about the strategy of some communities using essentially putting more butts in the seat by using controversy. Let's take, for example, the latest one that everybody's been talking about, Dave Chappelle. Dave Chappelle, funny guy, a lot of controversy about a lot of transphobic jokes and all that. Why would Dave use that strategy for essentially a law of diminishing returns? Because he's he's kind of dying in that sense, right? So why would he focus on that?
So the real answer, let me just say, okay, I'm trying to think of a proper way to put this.
You have to be proper on this show.
Because there's a very easy answer, but I don't know how well your legal representation is. And I don't know what libel laws are like in Canada. Let me just say this. comedians spend time talking about the things that are important to them. So, like, I really don't like religion, right? I have big problems with religion. I talk about religion a lot on stage. In the rare instance that I still do, almost never, but in the rare instance that I'm still asked to do stand-up, a tremendous amount of my material is about religion, what it's like to be non-religious. And so, if a comedian talks about how much they don't like pumpkin pie, right? It might not necessarily be that they don't like pumpkin pie. Maybe they just feel bad about how they feel about pumpkin pie. And if you read between the lines of their material when they talk about pumpkin pie, maybe their negativity about it and their slander of it and their hatred of it is self-disgust, because it's pretty hard to get that much material out of something you have absolutely no connection to. And I think a lot of these comedians, not naming names, but a lot of these comedians have an inner life that brings them a lot of conflict, especially when it comes to the trans community. And I think a lot of that material comes out because it is the way they deal with that conflict. That's good. I can't get sued for any of that. I said pumpkin pie.
Pumpkin pie. Therapeutic with pumpkin pie. So that means that in that sense, if that was the case, back in the old days, there was a lot of comedians that had really big problems with TV dinners and airport food, apparently.
Yes, exactly. And what were they doing at home? Eating TV dinners and airport food, right? Why did they talk about that? Because they were constantly in airports, constantly complaining about airport food. Yeah, I mean, it's so funny to go slightly serious with this, and I promise I'll be funnier in a second. Whenever you talk to someone who's got really deep problems with the trans community, who thinks it's gone wild and crazy, if you just listen, if you open up and just let them speak, is the same thing always happens. Every single time. They go, well, I was a tomboy, or I was a girly kid when I was a kid. These days they'd probably have called me trans. And on the one hand, it's a dismissal of the whole experience to try and minimize it, but I've heard it so many times at this point that I always wonder myself, like, how much of this is sour grapes? How much of this is someone who maybe had some tendencies, who felt a certain way about themselves, and it wasn't an option, and they look and they see young kids who feel that way today, getting empathy and a lived experience that they never got? I can see how that would make me very bitter. Very bitter and very, very angry.
That's an interesting thing. I'll have to take a check that out. Personally, in my experience, when I talk about trans people to other people that are not in agreement with the trans community, it's a lot of they just never understood going past the dynamic of male female. That's all they've learned. That they cannot see past that, which is of course brought in by religion, of course, as we know, and they've never heard of cultures thinking of more than two types of genders. And they're shocked whenever I tell them something like that. So, yeah, in Indonesia, they used to have 5 genders they celebrated before becoming Islamic. I said, kidding me? No, absolutely. This is not new.
Yeah. But I love the, it reminds me of the Ron White joke, getting back to comedy. I don't know if y'all remember this. It's from They Call Me Tater Salad. But he's got that great joke where he's like, everyone's a little gay. And I say that to my buddies, and they're like, nah, man, I ain't gay. And then I'm like, all right, so when you're watching porn, do you like the guy to have like a little shriveled, half-hard, 1 or 2 inch cock? And they go, no, I like a nice, big, hard cock. Oh, fuck, I'm a little bit gay. And that's the comedian Ron White's joke, which I think is just absolutely perfect.
Is there any topic comedy should not get into these days? Is there a topic a comedy can't really make any fun of?
No, I think all topics are open. I've talked about this other places, but I think the difference is between subject and object, right? So I think any subject is open for discussion, right? The Holocaust, murder, pedophilia, the death of innocent humans, right? All that stuff. The object is often what people think is what you shouldn't talk about, right? So for instance, like, there are lots of funny jokes about the Holocaust, but the object of the joke is not the people who died in the Holocaust, right? And I'll use an example because God knows I've got to earn some funny. Guy dies, old Jewish guy dies, and gets to heaven, and he meets God, and God's walking him around and show him and everything. And at one point, he turns to God and he makes a Holocaust joke. And God's face turns like gray, and he gets totally serious, and he goes, "I'm sorry, that was a loss of millions and millions of lives, but I don't think that's funny at all. I don't think that's funny one bit." And the guy turns to God and he goes, "You had to be there." That's a great. Now look, that's a dark fucking joke.
Yeah.
But the object of that joke is not the people who died in the Holocaust, right? Whereas if you look at object-based jokes, right, the jokes that people object to, the people that people get upset by, are often, "Can you believe that people are this thing?" You know, and I talk all the time. There are incredible trans comedians doing great jokes about trans people, great jokes about the trans experience, where trans people are the subject of those jokes. The difference is the joke is not trans people are worthy of mockery, right? The trans experience is silly, right? I forget, I'm forgetting the name of the comedian, but I'll you can put it in the show notes, but she's got this incredible joke she does on stage where she says, I have she has like short kind of pixie cut, and she goes, you know, I have a lot of people are surprised when they find out I don't hate men. It's just a haircut. One time I walked into a bookstore and they told me the poetry reading is that way. I have resting the poetry reading is that way face. Right? Incredible. Or there's another trans comedian, again, I'll send you all these names, but she says, you can use, my pronouns are they, them, or you can use whatever you want because I don't like conflict. Like, that's brilliant. Yeah, I think comedy can, and honestly should, go everywhere, right? We should find the edges, the hardest, most difficult things to talk about, and we should find a way to shine light in those places, right? But often I think what a lot of comedians, and just generally people who feel like comedy's being shut down or comedy is no longer able to be the way it used to be, I think what those people are missing is that it's not about whether or not you can joke about those things. It is what is the object of your joke? What's the point of your joke? Right? Is it to be edgy? Is it to harm people who were hurting? Have you earned this with people? I often use the example of Fat Steve, right? So, like, if your friend group has Fat Steve and everyone calls him Fat Steve, right, he's probably okay with that, right? You've probably earned that with his life, and you could probably call him Fat Steve. But if you're all hanging out at a bar and some guy walks over and goes, "Hey, that guy's fat," you'll all kick the shit out of that guy because he doesn't know Fat Steve. This is our Fat Steve. We love him, right? It's funny, I hate to use the word public figure, but as a somewhat public figure, a lot of the time people will hear the jokes on my podcasts and they've heard so much of me that they're like, "We are friends. We are joking." And so often people will open with me as an insult. They'll be like, "What's up, fuckface? Did you eat a bunch of chicken today?" And I'm just like, "Yikes. Hi. This is my infant son." But I know I've gotten used to it at this point. But, you know, I wish people were able to see that, because I think they would feel a lot less defensive, and I think they would feel a lot more comfortable and safe doing the comedy they do if they understood what people were objecting to.
Is it? I got to segue into this. Remember the Chris Rock Will Smith thing that happened a few months ago?
Sure.
There was a lot of controversy about this. I felt at the time, I said, I'm hoping Will Smith didn't start a trend of people just standing up to a comedian they didn't like and just physically attack. What are your thoughts on this? And do you feel that Chris Rock was, because I'm sure you'll agree with me, people say in comedy you're supposed to punch up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that Chris Rock was inadvertently punching down when he was mocking Will Smith as well?
Yeah, I mean, so what I'll say is it's definitely started a trend, right? Every friend I know who's a comedian has been like, audiences have gotten rowdier. I mean, I think it was the next week a guy got up and like tackled Dave Chappelle on stage. A Trump supporter was just like, "I don't like what you're saying," and decided to tackle him in the middle. What everyone saw on television was permission for anyone to take any joke personally and walk up and harm the comedian. And as someone who makes jokes that a lot of people don't like for a living, it was really hard to see people defending Will Smith in that situation. Regardless of what you think of Chris Rock's joke, as someone who makes the least popular kind of jokes you can make statistically for a living, and whose wife does that as well, people who were willing to sacrifice my safety and health based on whether or not they approved of the joke I was telling, or more importantly, if the person listening approved of the joke I was telling. That was really scary. That was really scary and sad. And if I'm being honest, I didn't speak out about it. We chose not to speak out about it on the show because there were people in my life who I care very much about who very much voiced an opinion that my safety was dependent on whether or not they approved of the joke. And I knew that not all of them were in a place of thinking about how that might affect me, right? I don't think anyone was like writing their hot take thinking like, oh yeah, Eli. But you know, as I was scrolling for the next couple of days and everyone was delivering their hot take about what jokes you can and can't make, I couldn't help but think like, oh, okay, so like if I got attacked on stage or if Anna got attacked on stage, you know, we're about to do QED, which is a giant skeptics convention, but not everyone in the audience will be a fan, right? Maybe a few people in the audience will be Christians, and like if I make a joke on stage and someone runs up and hits me, like which of these people are going to come to my defense and which of these people are going to want to hear the joke first? So, you know, that's pretty scary to me. That's scary as someone whose health and safety and wellness certainly seems to be conditional for some people. So yeah, that's my thought. And then, you know, as far as punching up, punching down goes, you know, Chris Rock is a comedian and Jada Pinkett Smith is a superstar multimillionaire. They're both billionaires, obviously, but, you know, the notion that he was punching down at her, I'm sorry, I just find it absurd. You know, she is a movie star. She is currently starring in movies, and Chris Rock is obviously a legendary comedian, but he's up there doing his job. He's on the safety of the stage. And it's not like he walked out and just said an offensive thing to her and didn't do any other jokes, right? He was in the middle of doing a roastery introductory set as part of an experience, and it's totally fine for people to say, hey, I don't like that joke, right? The object of that joke to me, right, and this is why I talk about subject-object, the object of the joke to me is people with alopecia, and I don't think people should make jokes about people with alopecia. Awesome. I absolutely understand that, and I respect that. When you say, and therefore you being violently attacked and embarrassed on a national stage and it being the news for the following week, I think that's okay, or I understand it. Like I said, that's really scary for those of us who tell jokes that other people don't like for a living.
I think in this situation, I don't think Chris Rock was actually aware that she had alopecia. He just maybe thought it was just a hairstyle that she was putting on. So maybe there was that. Only Dave would have.
Well, didn't he do a movie on black women's hair or something?
Yeah, no, he did. So he's definitely aware of it. I don't think he's aware of her. I don't know if he was aware of her personal condition. I honestly, like, when people talk about that situation, I think they're not talking about the fact that Will Smith has been having mental emotional problems in the public eye for a while. And because he's a person of color, the white sort of people around him do not know or do not have enough respect for him to tell when something might not necessarily be healthy. You know, this is a guy who spent COVID, doing interviews about his marriage and crying about the other men that she slept with during it. I don't know that that's necessarily the public, the healthiest relationship to the public eye, and I don't think that if that had been a white actor who ran up and attacked Chris Rock, he would have been allowed to stay for the rest of the ceremony and then given a trophy and been allowed to make a speech about how he was a protector of his family. I think that happened because a room full of really racially biased white people did not expect better of a person of color. They said, oh, well, that's just what they do. And that's
bigotry of low expectations, right?
exactly the bigotry of low
Yeah.
expectations. And a lot of people of color stepped forward after that and spoke to that and spoke to the fact that, letting two men of color have a violent interaction on that stage like that is a huge part of white supremacist hegemony, right? And certainly celebrating it the way culture did. Some people have pointed out that, like, the violence perpetrated by people of color, like the focus that was on that, versus the violence that's focused on, white men. Something that a friend was talking to me about, and she's a brilliant comedian, African American woman. We were talking about it. I was talking about, she was someone who I felt safe confiding in, and she said, I completely understand your point, Eli. My thing is this: nobody told me when Russell Crowe threw a phone at someone working at a hotel. I had to find out about it later. Someone was like, "Oh yeah, I remember seeing it in a gossip rag, or I saw a tweet about it, or I saw something about it." They didn't spend a week on it. Why do they spend a week when a man of color attacks someone on a national stage? I know it's not the same thing. I know Russell Crowe didn't throw a phone on stage, but she said that might also be feeding the white supremacist dialogue that's happening there, is that white people like to revel in black suffering, right? And that we have a hard time forgiving, and that we tokenize and we make people represent all of, people of color through their thoughts and actions. And we don't often hold white people to those same standards. So that's a lot.
I was just thinking Mel Gibson.
Right, exactly.
Right?
Mel Gibson and all the violent white, Tom Cruise or
What's his name?
Batman.
The one that was
Christian Bale,
right? His breakdown on the set, right, where he like screamed at a guy. If you've ever been on a film set before, you know how incredibly inappropriate that is, because people are moving around all the time, right? The notion that you would stop to scream at someone on a film set, like genuinely, like watch any behind the scenes anything of them, everyone is moving. So that was clearly just someone taking out their rage on someone who couldn't defend themselves. And again, like, we had a couple of days of it, but I don't know that it was as universally applied as the Will Smith, Chris Rock thing was. So I know that's all over the place. That's a lot of different subjects, but that's where I came down.
I've always had the bit of a hypothesis that, if we're going to go politically left or right or something like that, and it seems that the left right now politically has a hard time with a lot of communities, it's because it seems that everybody who's a leftist knows this one guy that they have on the right. They'll see something incredibly offensive and mean, actually, and when you call them out, they'll say, "It's a joke, man."
Yeah.
Right? You use that as a shield. And I think it's something like what we saw from Will Smith. There was almost like in their mind, would be a justified response to that. It says, no, this was like, this is that asshole that hides behind the joke thing, and basically stepped up to it and said, no, I don't believe you, crap.
Yeah, look. The truth of the matter is, a lot of people. I mean, we can talk about the problems with the left, but a lot of people who are on the far left, and I hate using that term because it automatically equates it to the far right. And like, the far right tried to overthrow the U.S. government. The far left are shitty on Twitter. Like, it's really important that we recognize that at the outset. But a lot of the time, what I find with the far left is that they are people in pain, right, who have been granted power by the internet, right? Because the internet is a very left-wing, very egalitarian space, right? So if you don't have a voice in society, you probably do have a voice on the internet, right? Certainly in leftist spaces, you have a voice in the internet. And in atheism, we're a pretty darn leftist space, right? So a lot of the times, what we're dealing with is someone who is going through a tremendous amount of pain because of what's going on in society. They have a chance to take power, and they abuse that power. Because don't we all, right? Don't we all get a little bit corrupted by our power and our influence from time to time? I certainly know I have. And so a lot of the time when I see so-called radical leftists or just bad leftist takes, it is because someone has chosen, is taking power in the place they can have it, and they're using it to avenge, if you will, other wrongs that are going on in their life. I use this as an example all the time, but I make jokes about the show Supernatural on my show and not liking Supernatural. I don't dislike Supernatural. I've seen like 2 episodes of it, and I've actually done more research to make jokes about Supernatural than I ever watched of Supernatural. But I talked about it for like a couple weeks in a row a few months ago, and someone wrote me an email being like, I don't know why you're picking on Supernatural. It's a good show. I like it, and it really means a lot to me. And they ended the email to me, do better. Right? And here's the thing, right? Like, I'm sure that person is perfectly nice, and I'm sure they are doing their absolute best. Right? And what I represented by making fun of Supernatural is probably a real thing and was very painful for them, and I don't want to discount their pain. But the fact that they were in the headspace where they could end that email unironically with do better, that is someone who has other shit going on that they are bringing to my door. So I think that speaks exactly to your point.
Yes. Continuing on the whole left versus right political spectrum there, I seem to get the idea that, I don't know if you'll agree with me here, but it seems that most of the humor happens from the left. And it seems, when I try to look at right-wing humor, there's nothing there. I mean,
Yeah.
there's that one Fox show, what is it called? Stalt or whatever it is, that idiot there. But there's absolutely nothing. Why is that? Can we know it?
Well, because humor is surprise plus recognition, right? And in order to be right wing, you have to lack empathy, right? All of right wingness, no matter what the political spectrum, whether you're in Canada where right wing means everyone's free, marijuana should only come on Wednesdays, or if you're in America and right wing means like let's bring Hitler back from the dead so he can run in 2024, right? The core of being right wing, right? And I don't mean that a lack of empathy necessarily makes you right wing, but the core of right wing is I don't believe you when you say you're having this experience. I don't care, right? And that lacks humor because people can't recognize a right wing joke because it's got nothing. The only people it will appeal to are people who feel your exact same brand of hate. Right? Which is why, way often, more than not, when you look at these comedians who get in trouble for transphobia, people have talked to me about this, and I say, I don't like this. And they go, man, you're too hard on them. Like, you're not listening to the material. It's just jokes. And the same thing I always say is, look, what's the joke? Break down the joke for me, right? Why did we throw our toast? Knock, knock, who's there? Why did we throw the toast out the window? Because he wanted to see butterfly. Why does that work? Because butterfly is a thing that flies. Butter and fly are 2 words. Has to do with toast. We all get it, right?
That's not political.
Right.
That's a knock-knock joke. It's all self-contained, right?
Exactly.
You don't have to have that context to bear on getting
Right.
the joke, right?
So
it was a right-wing poster there, right?
yeah. So when Dave Chappelle says something like "I'm Team Turf," what's the joke? You don't like trans people. That's not a joke. Right? There's no wordplay there. There's no nothing. And so often that's what happened is...
Turf means something out of church.
Oh, trans-exclusive radical feminist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And so a lot of the time, what you will see...
clearly not. I mean, like...
No, he's
Yeah.
not any of those things. But what happens a lot of the time is that a performer will just take a moment on a comedy stage to announce hatred, which people agree with, but it's not a joke, right? If you listen to that special, the Dave Chappelle special, there's an applause break after he says that. He says, I'm Team Turf. But people aren't laughing. They don't think it's funny. It's not a joke. They just agree with him politically.
Right? I don't think most people know what the term turf means.
No, he explain. I think he explains it
Okay.
In the special.
I thought about astroturfing. He really liked fake grass.
Right, exactly. He's a big fan of fake.
Eli, if considering that comedians now, ever since Jon Stewart, especially, are almost newscasters now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that the comedian now also bears a responsibility with their material?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think and I think one of the things that we've seen is that a lot of irresponsible comedians don't want to bear that responsibility, right? You look at people who defend Joe Rogan, right? Oh, it's just jokes, or oh, he's just a comedian, or just that or the other. But if people are getting their information from you, you are obligated to give that information with a bit of truth, right? And you have to call yourself out when you're wrong, and you also have to call yourself out when the things that you've made jokes about are seated in mistakes, right? And so, like, an example from me, right, as an example, is like I early in being a career comedian publicly, did not understand why white comedians weren't allowed to use the N-word on stage. And I even made a Facebook post where I was like, this was when Bill Maher used it. I don't know if you remember this back in the day. Bill Maher used it on a show. There was a bunch of controversy, and I was like, no, he was making a joke. It's fine. Now, I was very lucky in that I had a listener and a friend who took me aside and sort of explained why I was wrong about that, and the hurt and the damage that would do, and basically said, like, you have to understand it's not worth the joke, right? And it's a much longer conversation, and one that I won't try to repeat because I was listening to a person of color and I don't want to speak for them. Yeah. But it helped me learn in that way, and because I was able to own my mistake and grow from that, that's a way in which I've grown as a comedian. If you listen to early episodes of my show, there's some cringe, there's some not perfect humor there. There's some laughs that aren't necessarily aimed in the best direction. And we have people, we had Knowledge Fight on for the first time a few years ago, and those guys are so wonderful. And people who started listen to them on our show and were like, hey, this is a great show. Started at the beginning and wrote me an email being like, hey, do you stop saying that? And I'm like, I do stop saying that. I do stop making that. I apologize. I do stop making that joke. And to get a little serious, in the times when people have said, hey, I listened to earlier material and you said this or you did this and it really hurt me, the only thing I can say is, like, I completely understand that, and I have grown. And what a lot of these comedians who are against cancel culture or who feel like they're being canceled don't like to hear is, you apologize and then you just aim to do better. You're not always going to get a I forgive you. And that's really tough. That's something we're teaching my toddler right now is, I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, you would push over Sammy on the sandbox, and the teacher would walk you over, and they'd be like, say sorry, and you, I'm sorry. And then they would turn to Sammy, and they would say, Sammy, what do you say? And Sammy would say, it's okay. And one of the things that we're learning these days is that just because I'm sorry doesn't mean I've earned forgiveness. And that's really tough to hear. Really, really tough to hear if you're a privileged white dude. And I know it because I have the same issues, right? Sometimes I'll send someone that, hey, I've gotten better email, and they don't immediately send me back, oh, you're such a good boy. And I'm like, but I was better. I'm better now. I tried. Where's my cookie?
That's fantastic. So what do you think part A and B question here. Some of the greats from the past, we're talking, I don't know, Richard Pryor, Rodney Dangerfield, and all that stuff. What do you think they would be doing today? That's question A. Question B, what do you think the future of comedy is?
Yeah, it's hard to say where people from the past would be. I have such deep love in my heart for all of those legends, that I'm always like, they would be on my side. They would, of course, they all would. But some of the ones I'm sure would have followed this path, right? They are like everyone else in that as you get older, you get a little bit more, sometimes you get a little bit more conservative, and sometimes the way you relate to the world is kids these days, right? The career path of someone that I've incredibly admired is Patton Oswalt, and we don't talk about it a lot because he's alive, but Patton is the creator, the voice of alternative comedy. And nobody likes to hear, oh, it was Kinnison. Nobody was watching fucking Kinnison, okay? You show me a room where there were more than 3 people who weren't comedians watching Sam Kinnison do comedy, I'll eat my own kneecap. The truth of the matter is that Largo was largely built on the back of the alt comedian scene, and that was largely led the way by Patton. And if you look at Patton has his early routines, much like myself. There are some moments where they're just rough. Right, there are slurs flying and just bits, and look, they're great bits. They're not funny. they just don't hold up to the test of time. You know, because the objects that we were able to use for comedy back in the day, maybe you don't want to use objects like that anymore. And I have watched Patton learn and grow and do better and learn and grow and continue to get better. And that's the goal I have for myself. And, you know, the truth is I think Patton's in the same position that I am, which is that I have friends and people around me I trust who tell me when I've fucked up. You know, who I can turn to and say, like, am I wrong about this? And they'll say, yeah. And I'll be like, oh, okay, cool. And they also tell me when I'm not wrong, right? Because sometimes the left will chomp onto something like the Will Smith thing. And I'll be like, man, it sure sounds like a lot of people don't care if someone comes up on stage and punches my wife. Am I wrong about that? And my more lefty friends will go, no, I don't think you're wrong. And I'll be like, okay, good. I'm going to shut up. The other thing is, like, the power of shut up is fucking strong. Right? There's always a moment. I don't believe, most comedians are like, I had no idea people would be upset by that. I've never told an iffy joke and not been like, I don't know. Right? I always have a moment where I'm like, this might not play super well. Right? I'll tell you this, with the exception of the Supernatural email, and one other one, what was it? Gosh. There was, I don't know, I'll remember it, and I'll tell that story. But I rarely get an email or a piece of negative feedback that I'm not like, kind of saw that coming, right? I'm not always sorry. Usually I'm sorry, but sometimes I'm like, no, I see where you're coming from.
Eli, thank you so much for all this, man. I really, really appreciate that. But Mike is all yours, my friend. Plug yourself in. Be shameless. Where else can people find you? What's coming up for Eli Bosnick?
Oh, all right. Let's see. Well, we're going to be at QED in October, which is very exciting. If you've never been to QED, it is my favorite skeptics convention in the world. It is worth traveling to England. It is worth schlepping out there. It is worth traveling to England and then going to Manchester, which is certainly not England's, sunniest spot. But, I mean, something that people say all the time is like, what can atheism be? What can skepticism be? Gosh, the answer is QED. And also right now, they're almost sold out of tickets. So if you're going to go, book your tickets. But also right now, it is literally just like doctors and professors and us. So it's a golden time on their speakers list where it's like, and then also there will be some clowns. All these brilliant people saying brilliant things and clowns. And yeah, you can check out my podcast, God Awful Movies, where we make fun of Christian movies. The Scathing Atheist, where we make fun of the hellscape that is the current American political climate. The Skeptocrat, where we do that some more, because who could do that in just one podcast? Mm-hmm. Citation needed, if you need a break from politics, you want to come over, we read a Wikipedia article, or just a fucking article, once a week, and we make fun of it with our friends Tom and Cecil. And I've got my new parenting show, which if you like a little authentic, if you like a little from the heart, I'm doing it with Tom Curry over at Cognitive Dissonance and Thomas Smith over from Opening Arguments and Serious Inquiries Only, about parenting. And it's the parenting show with all the swearing you always desired. And that's called Dear Old Dads. And again, all of that is available wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you so much, Eli. But before I let you go, I gotta have you say, hi, this is Eli Bosnick, and I took a left in the valley.
Hi, this is Eli Bosnick, and I took a left in the valley.
Fantastic.